I never thought I'd become the victim of a self-appointed homeowner association president. But here we are. The day started like any other Saturday. I had just finished my bi-weekly shopping trip to Costco. My arms were loaded with paper bags full of groceries, and I was struggling to get my house key out without dropping everything all over my front porch. That's when I heard it, a screeching voice cutting through the peaceful suburban afternoon. "Those are mine." The shrill cry made me jump, and I nearly lost my grip on my groceries. I turned around to see my neighbor Karen storming across my lawn with her signature bob haircut bouncing with each aggressive step. Her face was contorted with rage, her pointer finger extended accusingly in my direction. Karen was dressed in what looked like a homemade uniform, khaki pants, and a polo shirt with Oakage HOA embroidered in clearly amateur stitching. She had a badge pinned to her shirt that appeared to be laminated printer paper with President written in bold letters. Around her neck hung a whistle on a lanyard, as if she was some kind of neighborhood referee, ready to call fouls on residents who stepped out of line. The whole ensemble would have been comical if she hadn't been so intimidating in her approach. "Excuse me?" I replied, completely baffled by her approach. I had only moved into this town-home community 3 months ago and had done my best to keep to myself. "Those provisions are community property," Karen declared, now standing at the bottom of my porch steps, hands on her hips. "All bulk purchases must be registered with the homeowner association for proper distribution. I am the president and I oversee all community resources." I stood there, mouth agape, grocery bags still hanging from my arms. "These are my groceries. I just bought them at Costco." I tried to keep my voice level and calm, though confusion and frustration were bubbling up inside me. I could see the items peeking out from the tops of the paper bags: a rotisserie chicken, a large pack of toilet paper, some fresh vegetables, and a box of cereal. Ordinary groceries that any person might buy. Nothing extraordinary or worthy of this bizarre confrontation. Not anymore. They're not. The homeowner association has implemented emergency protocols. All excess supplies must be inventoried and redistributed according to need. She insisted, actually climbing up the first step of my porch. "Hand them over and I'll make sure they're properly allocated." She reached out as if to take one of the bags from my arms, and I instinctively stepped back. The movement caused one of my bags to shift precariously, and I barely managed to adjust my grip before everything spilled onto the porch. "No," I said firmly, finally managing to get my key in the lock. "These are mine. I paid for them." "There's no such protocol." I pushed my door open with my foot, eager to escape this bizarre confrontation. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You'll regret this," she threatened, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the authorities right now. This is theft of community provisions." I shook my head in disbelief and went inside, closing the door behind me. Surely she wouldn't actually call the police over my own groceries. I was wrong. 20 minutes later, as I was putting away my frozen items, red and blue lights flashed through my front windows. She had actually called the police on me for bringing my own groceries into my own home. I moved into Oakage Town Homes because it seemed like the perfect starter home for a young professional like myself. The real estate agent had emphasized that while there was a nominal homeowner association fee for common area maintenance, it was largely inactive and handled by the property management company. There were no strict rules or regulations beyond the basics about exterior modifications and noise limitations. It was perfect for someone like me who wanted a nice place to live without the bureaucratic hassle that some planned communities entailed. I had toured the property, met a few neighbors who seemed friendly enough, and signed the papers without hesitation. The townhome itself was everything I wanted. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances, a small but private backyard, and a front porch where I could sit with a cup of coffee on weekends. The neighborhood had a pleasant, quiet atmosphere with tree-lined streets and well-maintained common areas. There was a small park within walking distance and several good restaurants nearby. My commute to work was reasonable, and the price had been within my budget. It really seemed like I had found the perfect place to build my life. For the first 2 weeks after moving in, everything was idyllic. My neighbors were friendly but not intrusive. We exchanged pleasant greetings when we crossed paths, but otherwise respected each other's privacy. The property management company promptly addressed the one minor maintenance issue I had with an outdoor light fixture. I was settling into a comfortable routine and feeling increasingly confident that I had made a good investment in my future. Then everything changed when Karen moved in next door. Everything was fine for the first 2 weeks. I settled in, arranged my furniture, and started establishing my new routine in the neighborhood. Then Karen moved in next door. Karen introduced herself on a Saturday morning as I was planting some flowers in the small garden bed in front of my townhome. She appeared suddenly standing over me with a clipboard in hand and a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello, neighbor. I'm Karen Wilkins, community organization specialist with vast experience in residential governance." Her tone was overly formal, as if she was reciting lines from a corporate training video. She handed me a business card that listed her as residential community manager with no company name. "I've just moved in next door, and I'm conducting a preliminary assessment of neighborhood compliance standards." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and extended my hand. "Nice to meet you, Karen. I'm fairly new myself. Only been here about 2 weeks." I tried to be friendly despite the strange introduction. She barely touched my hand before pulling away and making a note on her clipboard. "I see you're modifying the landscaping. Did you submit a request for exterior alteration form to the committee?" Her pen hovered expectantly over her clipboard. I blinked in confusion. No. My real estate agent and the property management company both said minor gardening in the existing beds was permitted without approval." Karen's mouth tightened into a thin line as she made another note. "Well, that's simply not correct. All exterior modifications, no matter how minor, require proper documentation and approval. I'll overlook it this time since you're new, but please remember for future reference." She tapped her clipboard meaningfully. "Proper governance requires proper documentation." Within days of this strange introduction, notices appeared in everyone's mailboxes announcing the formation of the Oakage Restoration Committee, with Karen declaring herself the interim president until formal elections could be held. The notices detailed a list of 23 new community standards that she expected everyone to adhere to immediately. Most neighbors laughed it off, explaining to me that there had never been an active homeowner association board in the 10 years the community had existed. The property management company handled everything necessary, and residents preferred it that way. But Karen was undeterred by the community's collective disinterest. She began conducting compliance inspections, leaving violation notices on doors for infractions like non-standard welcome mats and unapproved plant species on porch. I received my first notice for having a bicycle visible through my front window, which apparently violated the aesthetic cohesion standards of the community. The notice was printed on bright yellow paper with a bold black border. At the top was a crude logo that appeared to be clip art of a house with Oakage Restoration Committee in an overly ornate font beneath it. The notice itself was full of official-sounding language and cited various sections and bylaws that didn't actually exist. It detailed how my bicycle, visible through my front window, constituted a Class 2 visual aesthetic violation and demanded a compliance rectification within 48 hours or a $50 fine would be assessed. What was most concerning was the warning at the bottom stating that unpaid fines would accrue interest at 15% per week and could result in a property lien being placed. This was not just annoying, it bordered on fraudulent intimidation. I knew enough about real estate law to understand that a self-appointed committee had no legal authority to place liens on property. But I worried that other residents, particularly elderly ones, might not realize this and could be frightened into paying these bogus fines. I tried to be polite at first. I explained to Karen that according to my closing documents and the community bylaws, there was no active homeowner association board, and therefore her restoration committee had no actual authority. She dismissed my concerns, stating that she was revitalizing the dormant governance structure for everyone's benefit, and that my resistance to community improvement was concerning. I decided the best approach was to simply ignore her self-appointed authority while being cordial as a neighbor. This strategy worked for about a month. Then things started getting strange when it came to my groceries. It began with seemingly innocent comments when she would see me bringing in shopping bags. "That's a lot of food for one person," she would remark with a tight smile. In a proper community, resources are shared more equitably. I brushed these comments off as odd but harmless. Then I noticed her watching my comings and goings with increasing interest, particularly on days when I returned with groceries. She would often happen to be checking her mail or watering her plants exactly when I pulled into my driveway with shopping bags. Soon her comments became more direct. "You know, some people in the community might be struggling to afford quality food," she would say. "A community pantry would ensure everyone has access to adequate nutrition." I began to notice her peering through her blinds whenever I came home with grocery bags. On several occasions, I caught her taking photographs of me unloading my car. Once, when I confronted her about it, she claimed she was documenting resource allocation patterns for community planning purposes. When I told her to stop photographing me, she huffed indignantly and said, "As homeowner association president, I have the right to monitor compliance with community standards, including equitable resource distribution." Her surveillance became increasingly obvious and intrusive. She installed what appeared to be a security camera on her porch pointed directly at my driveway. I contacted the property management company about this, and they sent her a notice that unauthorized surveillance equipment directed at other residents' properties violated privacy laws. She simply moved the camera to her front window instead, partially hidden behind a curtain but still clearly visible. One evening, I returned home late after work to find Karen actually standing in my driveway, arms crossed, apparently waiting for me. "The homeowner association board meeting was tonight," she said accusingly. "Your absence has been noted in the minutes as non-compliance with community engagement requirements." When I pointed out that there was no legitimate homeowner association board and therefore no mandatory meetings, she simply handed me a non-attendance fee notice for $25 and stalked back to her house. Then one day I returned home from work to find that a bag of groceries I had left by my door, while I went back to the car for more, had disappeared. It contained mostly non-pea perishables, pasta, rice, and canned goods. When I mentioned it to my other neighbor, they told me they had seen Karen pick up a bag from my porch, but assumed she was helping me bring things inside. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was securing at-risk provisions and had placed them in the community stockpile for proper allocation during emergencies. She refused to return the items, insisting they were now part of the community reserves. The following week, I found an official-looking notice in my mailbox demanding a monthly food tithe for the Oakage Emergency Preparedness Pantry. The notice stated that all residents were expected to contribute 10% of their monthly food purchases to ensure community resiliency during shortages. It was signed by Karen as president and emergency resource coordinator. I asked several neighbors about this food tithe, and not one of them had heard of such a requirement before Karen moved in. Most found the idea absurd and assured me they had no intention of complying with these fabricated rules. The notice included detailed instructions on how to calculate the 10% tithe and specified that certain items were considered high priority for community needs. Canned meats, dried beans, rice, pasta, powdered milk, and surprisingly, coffee and chocolate. These last two items seemed oddly specific and made me wonder if Karen was simply listing her own preferred foods. The bottom of the notice included a warning that failure to comply will result in community non-compliance fees of $100 per offense. I took the notice to the property management company's office the next day. The manager, a practical woman named Linda, sighed deeply when I showed it to her. "You're the fourth person to bring this in," she said, shaking her head. "I can assure you there is absolutely no authorized food, tithe, or community pantry in Oakage townhomes. This Karen person has no authority to collect either food or money from residents." Linda gave me a formal letter stating that the property management company was the only authorized entity to manage the community affairs, and that any fees, fines, or contributions demanded by any individual resident should be considered unauthorized and invalid. She advised me to keep the letter for my records and to present it if Karen persisted with her demands. "We're gathering documentation on this situation," Linda explained. "If her behavior constitutes harassment, we may need to take legal action." I decided to install a doorbell camera after the grocery theft incident. My property management company confirmed what I already knew. There was no active homeowner association board, no emergency protocols, and certainly no community pantry requirement. They suggested documenting any further incidents and reporting harassment to the local authorities if necessary. I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but Karen's behavior was becoming increasingly intrusive and concerning. The situation came to a head on a Saturday afternoon. I had just returned from a significant shopping trip, With inflation making groceries more expensive, I had taken advantage of several sales and bought in bulk to save money. My car was filled with bags and I was making multiple trips to bring everything inside. On my second trip from the car, Karen intercepted me on the sidewalk leading to my porch. "Stop right there," she commanded, physically positioning herself in my path. She was wearing what appeared to be a homemade badge that read, HOA Enforcement Officer, in poorly printed letters. "I need to inspect those provisions before you take them inside." She had a clipboard with her and was wearing latex gloves as if she was about to perform some kind of official inspection. A lanyard around her neck held several keys and what looked like a small digital scale. The absurdity of the situation would have been laughable if it wasn't so intrusive and concerning. I tried to step around her. "These are my personal groceries. Karen, please let me pass." She shifted to block me again. "Essential items such as eggs, milk, and canned goods must be redistributed according to the community preparedness protocol," she insisted, actually reaching for one of my bags. 30% of all basic necessities must go to the community pantry. Those are the rules. I could see other residents watching from their windows and porches, some with phones out, apparently recording the confrontation. One neighbor, an older woman named Gladys, had stepped onto her porch and was openly shaking her head in disbelief at Karen's behavior. I pulled the bags away from her grasp. "There are no such rules." "Now please move aside." Karen's eyes narrowed and she pulled a small notebook from her pocket. "This is your third compliance violation this month. Community standards clearly indicate that repeated violations result in escalating penalties, including potential property liens and eviction proceedings." "Karen, that's enough," I said firmly, my patience finally exhausted. "You have no legal authority here. There is no official homeowner association, no community pantry, and no right to my groceries. Now please move aside before this becomes a legal matter. You cannot hoard resources during uncertain times," she exclaimed, her voice rising to a pitch that attracted the attention of other neighbors. "This is a direct violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Oak Ridge Community Standards." Her voice had reached a volume that caused several more neighbors to emerge from their homes. A small crowd was beginning to gather at a safe distance, watching the confrontation with expressions ranging from concern to amusement. I could see several people with their phones out, clearly recording the incident. "Karen, there is no Section 7. There are no official community standards beyond the basic bylaws managed by the property company," I said firmly. "These are my groceries that I paid for. You have no right to them." She began flipping frantically through a binder she produced from a large tote bag slung over her shoulder. The binder was labeled Oak Ridge Homeowner Association Official Bylaws in what was clearly printed and taped onto a standard office binder. "It's right here," she insisted, though she couldn't seem to find the specific page she was looking for. "All residents agreed to these terms when purchasing property in this community. That binder is something you created yourself," I pointed out. "It's not a legally binding document, and no one here agreed to it." Her face flushed with anger. "We'll see about that," she snapped, pulling out her phone. To my absolute disbelief, she dialed 911 right in front of me. "Yes, emergency services. I need to report a violation of community regulations and possible hoarding of essential supplies at Oak Ridge Town Homes," she said into the phone. "The perpetrator is refusing to comply with emergency distribution protocols and is becoming aggressive." I stood there in shock as she provided my address to the emergency dispatcher. She was literally calling the police because I wouldn't give her my groceries. Several neighbors had come outside now, watching the scene unfold with expressions ranging from confusion to amusement to concern. I decided the best approach was to remain calm, continue bringing in my groceries, and wait for the police to arrive. I knew I had done nothing wrong, and perhaps this would finally put an end to Karen's delusions of authority. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my townhome. Two officers stepped out, looking somewhat confused as they surveyed the scene. Karen immediately rushed over to them, speaking rapidly and gesturing wildly toward my home. I calmly waited on my porch. Grocery bags now safely inside. Door locked just in case Karen tried to enter while I was speaking with the officers. "Good afternoon, officers," I greeted them as they approached, Karen trailing behind them with a triumphant expression. "I understand my neighbor called you about a dispute. The older officer nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Yes, we received a call about someone violating homeowner association rules and hoarding essential supplies. Can you tell us your side of what's happening here? I took a deep breath. Officers, I just returned from grocery shopping. These are my personal groceries that I purchased with my own money. I have the receipts inside if you need to see them. My neighbor here believes she has the authority to confiscate a portion of my food for what she calls a community pantry, but there is no officially recognized homeowner association board in this community, and certainly no rules about sharing groceries. I went inside briefly and returned with a folder containing all my documentation. Here are my receipts from today's shopping trip, I explained, pulling out the long paper slip. And here's a copy of my closing documents from when I purchased my townhome, which clearly outlines the community governance structure. As you can see, there's only a property management company that handles common area maintenance. There's no active homeowner association board with rulemaking authority. I flipped to another section, and here's the communication I received from the property management company just last week confirming that Karen has no official position or authority to create or enforce rules. The officers reviewed the paperwork carefully while Karen fidgeted impatiently beside them. I could tell she hadn't expected me to be so prepared with documentation. The younger officer looked particularly interested in my receipts. So, you purchased all these groceries today at Costco? He confirmed. Yes, that's correct, I replied. I have the Costco membership card as well if you need to see it. I pulled out my wallet to show them. That won't be necessary, the older officer said. Your receipts and documentation are quite clear. Karen interrupted. That's not true. I am the duly appointed president of the Oakage Restoration Committee, and our emergency protocols clearly state that all residents must contribute to the community resources during times of need. The younger officer looked confused. Ma'am, is this an actual homeowner association with legally filed bylaws? We're in the process of revitalization, Karen hedged, but the authority is inherent in the community charter, which I've been appointed to enforce. Appointed by whom? The officer asked. Karen stumbled over her words. By the necessity of community oversight. Someone needs to ensure proper governance. I seized the opportunity to retrieve my documentation, officers. I have my closing documents here that outline the actual community structure. There is a property management company that handles common areas, but there's no active homeowner association board with rulemaking authority. I also have footage from my doorbell camera showing M. Karen taking a bag of my groceries from my porch last week without permission, which is actually theft. The officers reviewed my paperwork and watched the video on my phone. The footage clearly showed Karen approaching my porch last week while I was at work, looking around suspiciously, then quickly taking a grocery bag that had been delivered and walking away with it. In another clip from earlier today, it showed our confrontation on the sidewalk with Karen physically blocking my path and reaching for my grocery bags while I tried to get past her. This is clear evidence of theft, the older officer said, looking up from my phone, and what appears to be attempted theft again today. Karen sputtered in indignation. It wasn't theft. I was securing community resources according to the emergency preparedness protocol. Section 12 clearly states that all bulk purchases must be registered with the homeowner association and a portion contributed to community reserves. During this time, more neighbors had gathered, many of them filming the interaction with their smartphones. I recognized faces from around the community, people I had exchanged pleasant greetings with, but never really gotten to know until now. There was a palpable sense of solidarity forming among us, unified against Karen's outlandish behavior and claims of authority. The older officer stepped away briefly to speak with his colleague, their expressions serious as they conferred in hushed tones. I noticed they occasionally glanced toward Karen, who was now pacing and muttering to herself about protocol violations and community standards. When they returned, the older officer had a small notebook in hand. Miss Karen, it appears there is no legal basis for your claims of authority in this community. You cannot demand that your neighbor share his groceries with you or anyone else. That would constitute theft. Additionally, calling emergency services for a non-emergency situation like this is misuse of police resources. Karen's face contorted with indignation. But the community needs proper governance. People can't just do whatever they want. There needs to be oversight and resource management. Ma'am, the younger officer said firmly, unless there are legally established and properly filed homeowner association bylaws that have been agreed upon by the community, you don't have the authority to create and enforce rules. And even if there were, homeowner associations cannot confiscate private property like groceries. By this point, quite a crowd had gathered. One of my neighbors, an older gentleman named Frank, who had lived in the community for over 8 years, spoke up. Officers, this woman has been harassing multiple residents with fake violation notices and demands. She left a citation on my door, claiming my American flag was mounted at a non-regulation angle and demanded a $200 fine. She told me I couldn't park my car in my own driveway overnight without paying a $25 overnight vehicle accommodation fee. Frank continued, pulling out a ridiculous notice from his pocket. And when I refused, she put this on my windshield. He handed the officers a homemade violation notice printed on bright orange paper with a poorly photocopied letterhead. Another neighbor, Maria, added, she told me my children couldn't play in their own backyard without submitting an outdoor recreation application with a $50 processing fee. When I ignored her, she started taking photographs of my children playing and said she was documenting violations. I had to threaten to call the police before she stopped. She demanded that I remove my satellite dish because it wasn't an approved communication device. Called out another neighbor, a young man who worked in tech. When I explained that federal law protects my right to have a satellite dish, she said, homeowner association rules supersede federal regulations in planned communities. I actually had to get a letter from my lawyer to make her back off, and she tried to force her way into my home for an internal compliance inspection. Added an elderly woman who lived a few doors down, said she needed to check if my furniture met community aesthetic standards. Can you imagine? I had to practically close the door in her face. More neighbors began to share similar stories, each more ridiculous than the last. One had been told their garden gnome was an unapproved decorative element requiring a variance permit with a $75 fee. Another have received a notice that their wind chimes exceeded the ambient noise allowance for the community and would incur daily fines until removed. A family had been told they could only grill outdoors on designated days and had to pay a cooking emissions fee for the privilege. The officers listened, taking notes and occasionally giving Karen glances that ranged from skepticism to outright disbelief. Karen's confident demeanor began to crumble as she realized the neighborhood was united against her fabricated authority. The older officer finally turned to Karen. Ma'am, I'm issuing you a formal warning for filing a false police report. There is no emergency here, and you've misrepresented your authority. Additionally, based on what we're hearing from multiple witnesses, your behavior could constitute harassment. He then turned to me. Sir, if you wish to press charges for the theft of your groceries that was captured on your camera, you have that right. Alternatively, you can file for a restraining order if the harassment continues. Karen's face palled. But I'm just trying to establish proper community standards. Someone has to take charge. Not without proper legal procedure and community consent, the officer replied firmly. I suggest you cease issuing unauthorized notices and making demands of your neighbors unless you want to face legal consequences. As the police were preparing to leave, someone in the crowd called out, Hey everyone! The video of Karen calling the cops over groceries is already on the neighborhood Facebook page. Several people pulled out their phones and there were gasps and laughter as they watched the recording. Karen stood frozen, watching her self-created authority collapse in real time as neighbors shared stories and footage of her various ridiculous demands and violations. Frank, the neighbor with the allegedly improperly angled flag, stepped forward with his phone. And I've just shared an email from the property management company confirming there is no active homeowner association board and that all of Karen's citations and fees are completely fabricated and should be ignored. One of my other neighbors, a paralegal named Michelle, added, I've created a group chat for anyone who's received harassment from Karen. We can document everything and take collective action if necessary. Karen looked around at the united front of neighbors, her mouth opening and closing without words. Finally, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her town home, slamming the door behind her. The officers left after making sure the situation was under control, advising everyone to document any further harassment and not to hesitate to call if Karen's behavior escalated or became threatening. The impromptu neighborhood gathering turned into an informal community meeting right there on the shared green space. People exchanged contact information, shared their care and stories, and for the first time since I moved in, I felt a genuine sense of community connection. Several neighbors helped me bring in the last of my groceries, offering words of support and commiseration. She tried to tell me I couldn't park in my own driveway because my car was the wrong color for our street aesthetic. One neighbor laughed as he carried a bag of groceries up my steps. She left a note on my door saying my winches were disrupting the community sound harmony and demanded they be removed within 24 hours. Another added, helping me organize items on my kitchen counter. She actually tried to create a pet registry and wanted to charge a $50 fee for each pet, plus monthly pet impact fees based on the animal's weight. A woman who owned 2 cats told me as she helped put away canned goods. Frank, the neighbor with the American flag, suggested creating a real community organization, not a restrictive homeowner association, but a neighborhood watch and support group where people could get to know each other, help each other out, and address any genuine community concerns through proper channels and consensus. We could have actual community events, block parties, holiday celebrations, maybe even a community garden if people are interested, he suggested, but nothing mandatory and certainly no fines or fees. People responded enthusiastically to Frank's idea. Contact information was exchanged and plans were made for a proper community gathering the following weekend. Ironically, Karen's attempt to control everyone through fear and fabricated authority had actually brought us together in a positive way, creating the very sense of community she had claimed to want, just without her at the helm. As the gathering dispersed, people returned to their homes with a new sense of solidarity. I finally finished unpacking my groceries, relieved that the bizarre ordeal was over. The community had come together, not under Karen's self-appointed rule, but in unified resistance to her absurd demands. It was oddly satisfying to see how her attempt to control everyone had actually brought the neighborhood closer together in opposition. The next few days were blissfully quiet. Karen's door remained closed, her curtains drawn, no new notices appeared in mailboxes, and no inspections were conducted. It seemed the public humiliation of having the police explain she had no actual authority, combined with the neighborhood's unified stand against her, had finally put an end to our homeowner association and president fantasies. I began to relax, hopeful that we could all move forward as a peaceful community without self-appointed dictators. The impromptu gathering had led to real connections among the residents. Several of us had exchanged phone numbers and started a group chat to plan the upcoming community picnic that Frank had suggested. People were sharing ideas for activities, offering to bring food, and generally showing enthusiasm for building genuine community connections based on mutual respect rather than fabricated authority. I had volunteered to coordinate games for the children, while Maria offered her skills as a part-time caterer to help organize the food table. Even the property management company had gotten involved, offering to provide tables, chairs, and a small budget for the event. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I was part of a real neighborhood, not just a collection of houses. I finally knew my neighbors' names and had even been invited over for coffee by the elderly couple 3 doors down. It was everything I had hoped for when I purchased my townhome. And ironically, we had Karen's ridiculous behavior to thank for bringing us all together. Then about 3 days after the incident, I returned home from work to find something strange on my front porch. A half-eaten rotisserie chicken. The remains placed neatly on a paper plate. No note, no explanation, just a partially consumed chicken with greasy fingerprints on the plastic container it had come in. I checked my doorbell camera footage and saw Karen placing it there around noon, looking furtively around before hurrying back to her own townhome. The message was clear enough. This wasn't over. She might be laying low for now, but Karen wasn't done with her mission to establish control. I disposed of the chicken, washed my hands thoroughly inside. Karen had gone quiet, but this petty, passive-aggressive warning suggested she was merely regrouping, not surrendering. The battle for grocery independence had been won, but the war for neighborhood sanity, it seemed, would continue. I immediately sent a message to our new neighborhood group chat, attaching the doorbell camera footage of Karen leaving the half-eaten chicken. Heads up, everyone. It seems Karen isn't quite done with her campaign. Just found this lovely gift on my porch. The responses flooded in quickly, expressions of disgust, concern, and offers of support. That's actually illegal. It could be considered food tampering or harassment, Michelle, the paralegal pointed out. You should report this to the police. Check your footage from earlier days, suggested another neighbor. She might have been doing more than we realized. Following this advice, I reviewed the past week's footage and sure enough, discovered something concerning. The night before the chicken incident, around 2 a.m., the camera had captured Karen creeping around my front yard, peering into my windows and testing my door handle. She had been wearing dark clothing and moving furtively, clearly trying to avoid detection. I immediately called the non-emergency police line and reported this trespassing along with the chicken incident. They took my report seriously, especially when I mentioned the previous confrontation and shared the footage of her trying my door in the middle of the night. An officer came by that evening to review the footage and take a formal statement. This is concerning behavior, the officer said after watching the videos. The trespassing and trying your door handle at 2 a.m. elevates this beyond a simple neighbor dispute. I strongly recommend you file for a restraining order. For now, though, I could at least enjoy my own food in my own home without police intervention. A victory that should have been too absurd to even contemplate. Yet here we were. Such is life in the suburban trenches with a neighbor who believes your groceries should be hers to distribute. But with a united neighborhood and documented evidence of her behavior, I felt better prepared for whatever bizarre scheme Karen might cook up next.